All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is February 3rd, 2020, 5:36. This is a public meeting of the School Board of the West Bend Joint School District Number 1. More than 24 hours prior to this meeting, notice of the time, place, date, and subject matter of the meeting was posted in each school building, the entrance doors at the Education Service Center, and at the West Bend Community Memorial Library. A copy was also sent to the Daily News, WBKV, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and other media sources who have requested notice of this meeting. Nancy, Don, can you confirm this meeting was properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Great, thanks. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Hopefully board members have had a chance to review tonight's agenda, and I will move to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Before we get started tonight, I do want to clarify something that happened at our last board meeting. We had a board member request an item be pulled from our consent agenda, and first time that's happened to me since I've sat in this chair, so didn't quite know how to handle that. We ended up taking a vote on whether or not the board members should be allowed to do that. Thankfully, that vote passed because we weren't really supposed to take a vote. And we were not supposed to take a vote. I learned that the next day. I called WASB and had a little consultation on that. So any board member can pull something from consent for further discussion and an individual vote. It doesn't have to be before the meeting starts. It doesn't have to be before the agenda of the meeting is approved. Obviously, it has to be sometime before we hit the consent on our agenda. So my apologies, Nancy, that happened. I will admit that I'm wrong.
I'll admit that I was right.
That's fine. But I'm glad that the vote turned out the way it did because it didn't affect our business that night. So, talking about consent agenda, I'm not going to pull something out of consent agenda, but maybe draw some attention to it. In our consent agenda, we are probably, I assume the way the vote will go, be accepting our superintendent's resignation from the district. And he will be here with us for the next 5 months. He's going to finish out the school year with us. He promised me that he's going to show up every day and work hard all the way up until the end. But for those of you in the public who didn't see the newspaper article on Saturday that was announced in the paper, and maybe Superintendent, I'll turn it over to you if you have any comments on that.
Yes, I would just like to thank everyone. This has been a phenomenal experience for me the last couple of years. I was planning on staying longer, but it just really was an opportunity. My wife and I talked about it, and we decided that we wanted to be back to our family and friends and our home in the Black Hills, and so it truly has. I have nothing but fond memories of the West Bend School District. It's been a great school board to work with. It has been an excellent leadership, administrative team. We've got excellent, outstanding teachers in our district. Students and parents, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to work with you, and I look forward to, we have a lot to do between now and the 1st of July, and so it's going to be busy, and we'll continue to do that, but just thank you one and all, and thank you for school board for giving me the opportunity to work in this school district, and so thanks.
We won't quite say our goodbyes to you yet. Like I said, you've got 5 more months with us, but appreciate you letting us know when you did, so that we just, in fact, started tonight talking about how we're going to fill your shoes, and they will be tough shoes to fill. Would you like to introduce who's going to be sitting at the board table probably at our next school board meeting?
If I could, Jennifer Roush is in the back, and so Jennifer, if you would stand. Maybe sing a little song if you would, or do something. So Jennifer is currently, or was the administrative assistant at East High School, and so we brought her over, and so this is her last time to sit in the back. Nancy is up here helping us out with minutes, and so at our next meeting, Jennifer will be here, and so we are very excited to have Jennifer on board, and she'll do a great job. And if you don't know her, get a chance to visit with her. She's your administrative assistant, just like she is mine, and so I know you'll be very pleased to work with her as we go forward. Great. So thank you, Jennifer.
All right, let's have some fun here. we're going to recognize Scott Mindel for receiving the State of Wisconsin VFW High School Teacher of the Year Award. And Scott, if you haven't seen one of these recognitions before, we make people stand right here and face that way so the folks at home can see you.
All right. Thank you, Board. My name is John Kleinmaus. I'm from the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 1393 here in West Bend. And I'm here tonight with our post commander, Bob Bueller, and our, where's she at? Oh, she's over there, I'm sorry. Our auxiliary, VFW auxiliary member, Donna Kleinmaus. The VFW Teacher of the Year Award, that contest recognizes 3 teachers for their outstanding commitment to teaching Americanism and patriotism to their students. Each year, an elementary, junior high, and high school teacher whose curriculum focuses on citizenship education, topics that these can be nominated for the VFW National Citizenship Education Teacher of the Year Award. Those national winners would receive a $1,000 award for professional development, a $1,000 award for his or her school, 2 award plaques, one for the teacher, one for the school, and an all expenses paid trip to attend the VFW conference to receive their award. This year it's going to be in Reno, Nevada. Teachers are first nominated at the local VFW post. Our post nominated Scott last November. The winning entries from each post are then sent to their district in each state for judging. Those winning entries from each district are then judged in their state. This past Saturday at the VFW State Convention held in Green Bay, the first place teacher for each level was announced. And this evening, I'm here and pleased to announce that West Bend High School teacher Scott Mindel is the VFW 2019-2020 High School Teacher of the Year for the state of Wisconsin. His entry is now competing for the VFW National Teacher of the Year Award. So Scott. You have 20 minutes to speak.
Yeah.
As I said on Saturday when I received the award, I am honored by the nomination, first of all, and actually humbled by the award. I would like to thank the VFW Post 1393 for sponsoring that nomination, and especially administration, district administration at the board level, at the superintendent's level, our high school building administration for their support in every I don't know, crazy idea that I try to get off the ground and running. So, thank you, and again, I'm honored.
Awesome. Congratulations, Scott, and we are truly honored to have you a part of our district and the things that you do to honor our vets, and thank you to the Post for nominating Scott. He is very deserving of this award, so congratulations. Next, we're going to recognize our high school students who are on their way to a ProStart Certificate of Achievement. They've passed the SafeServe Certified Food Managers qualification, so it looks like Sally's going to do that. And just like Scott did right here, and face Ms. Sawyer.
So I'm very happy to present this group of students from both West Bend East and West Bend West high schools. These students, although haven't, participated in any sort of running activity except running around a kitchen, have demonstrated excellence by passing the National ServSafe Certification exam for food service managers. If you don't know what that is, every food service facility in the state and country has to have a certified food manager working at all times. we're happy to announce that we have 19 young people from our high schools that are now able to go out and be certified food managers in our community, which is a huge, huge thing for our community, because as I tell them every day, if you want a job, you just have to go into a business and ask for one, because everybody in the food service industry, whether you're working in a nursing home, a hospital, a restaurant, they're all looking for good help. Notice I said good help, okay? Because I'll tell you, I would work side by side with any one of these young people at any time. They're a joy to be with every day. They have demonstrated excellence by really, truly understanding the importance of food service safety and sanitation. They work hard 3 days a week operating our restaurant called the Nifty Nibble. And then many of them, once they leave school, go off or go home and then go to work somewhere in our community or surrounding community. So I just want to say thank you for your excellence, and continue to strive for excellence. And as we say in our classroom, we don't strive for perfection because that's unattainable. We strive for excellence. And as long as you're doing the best job that you can do, that's really all that we ask. So I would just like to recognize Ben Van Valza, Dan Malone, Zach Zoromsky, Gavin Ampey, who, on a side note, is the second generation of Ampeys that I've now taught. Okay. So Senora Castor and I were just talking about that. We're now in our second generation people. Aiden Rayrauer, Ethan Cole, Hector Lara, Grayson Pokrant, Tyler Foisey, Sam Dobert, Lindsay Stockton, and Anna Chang. So if you guys want to just turn around and show the board something other than your backside, that would be lovely. And like I said, this is a huge honor for these kids, and I am just tickled that they did as well as they did on this test. This is the highest number of students we've ever had become certified food managers. So that speaks volumes to the quality of students that I have in my classroom and that I'm fortunate to work with every day. So parents, thank you for allowing me to have your children. They make my day great.
Cool. Congratulations.
Yes.
Congratulations to all of you, and Sally, it speaks volumes to the program that you do up at the high school for these students to benefit, so congratulations. The last recognition I want to shout out tonight is February 10th through the 14th is National Bus Driver Appreciation Week, and so to our extended family at Johnson Bus Service who take our students to and from school safely every day, thank you very much for what you do, and for any students in the room that are bus riders, please thank your bus drivers that week. We're going to turn it over to Jim and Emily for a high school update.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. To start off, I'll talk about athletics. On the 18th, East Wrestling took home another championship. The team won the Norski Invite at D Forest High School. And girls varsity basketball crushed Campbellsport with a 71-55 game on the 27th. They also crushed Port Washington on the 25th with a final score of 65-25. Now academics. We recently started our second semester for this year, which means grades are reset and students' schedules change and add new classes. So for the past few weeks, students have been starting new units, which to some could be an exciting change. For example, physics students are now learning about different forces that are applied to everyday objects. And to help with the students grasping this concept, teachers are creating unique labs for the students to test out different forces. Staying on the topic of science, biology just started a new unit about DNA, RNA, and cell mutations. In order for these students to visualize DNA and RNA, biology teachers demonstrated how to isolate cells from a strawberry. The students loved this. Math classes have also begun teaching new units. Advanced algebra classes will soon start to learn about three-point graphing as well as locating planes in a 3D graph. Spanish students are learning how to speak in past tense, and on top of that, they were just introduced to many new verbs for them to use. Similarly to Spanish, French just began the past tense used for history and storytelling. In extracurricular classes, such as band and orchestra, Students are preparing for the largest concert upcoming on the 11th. This concert will include elementary through high school students, and band students just had a concert last Thursday. Business Strategies class is looking to run 1 or 2 businesses this semester. One of them is based off of selling stickers or bracelets, and the other is based off of selling t-shirts. And finally, our school talent show is Friday the 7th at 7 p.m. at the Silver Lining Arts Center. Thank you.
Hi guys, or what's left of the audience, which is kind of a relief. The new semester has begun and finals are finally over. With the onset of the second half of the school year comes semester report cards and next year's course planning for freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. Additionally, the high schools have been attempting to implement online class selections for the students to complete independently, lightening the tedious coursework on behalf of the counselors. Soon enough, the juniors will be taking the ACT. Traditionally, all other grades have been off this day, but this year the high schools are using the free school day as a virtual day, where students will have teacher-assigned work to complete online the day of the ACT. Juniors will be required to stay for the remainder of the school day. For clubs, competition season has begun for most of the clubs. Our mock trial team is competing at their regionals tournament in Appleton this upcoming weekend, hoping to qualify for their state tournament. Our Model United Nations team is preparing for their competition in late March. West Forensics has had 2 invitational meets recently, one at Marquette High School in Milwaukee, and last Saturday at Slinger High School. At the Marquette and Slinger competitions, Lily Mottet, Makai Wallace, and Allison Hudson all took home first place. Last weekend, the Science Olympiad team competed at their regionals competition at the UW Milwaukee campus and brought home multiple medals. And Student Council is planning for the multi-school charity dance in March at the Washington County Fair Park. The number of tickets is limited, and they are on sale this week in the bookkeeper's office. For athletics, West Winter's sports are in full swing. Last Thursday, West Wrestling pinned Whitefish Bay in their meet. Adding on to that victory, Friday night, our JV1 and JV2 boys basketball teams and our girls varsity basketball teams crushed the Blue Dukes. Friday night, the West Bend Divers competed at Middleton, and last Saturday was jam-packed with competitions. West Gymnastics had a meet at the Anago Invite. Ice Bears boys hockey competed at the Ozaki Ice Center. Wrestling competed at the Scramble in Deerfield, and snowboarding competed in the Tyrol Basin in Madison. And last but not least, a shout out to our own Shelby Rice, who competed at the state dance competition individually. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily and Jim. Lots of cool stuff going on at the high school. Come to public participation in our agenda tonight, and I do have a public participation comment card from Sally Hoyer. So as you're coming to the mic, just remind you there's 3 minutes to speak, and we won't engage in back and forth conversation with you, but we're here to listen. And if you could just state your name and address and go from there.
Sally Hoyer, 1840 Park Avenue, West Bend. I'm here as a community member and as a teacher, and to be very honest with you, when I heard that Don Kierkegaard was resigning, it made me very sad. I just want to thank you for bringing the calm to our stormy waters and bringing us back to a time where people can agree to disagree without fear of retribution. And that speaks volumes about who you are as a person. So I just wanted to say thank you. And board, you have a huge challenge ahead of you. We can take a look at past boards, and we know some of them, to be very honest, took the easy road. I don't think I need to say any more about that. I know this is going to be a tough decision, but I know that you will find someone that is qualified to continue the calm instead of bringing more storm to our skies. So, good luck, and thank you.
Thank you, Sally. We could probably use that pep talk for the next 2-3 months. Appreciate that. Anybody else wishing to address the board tonight? Seeing none, we will move on to our clerk's report.
4 individuals filed candidacy papers by the January 7th deadline for a position on the Board of Education for West Bend Joint School District Number 1. They are Joel Ongert, Tawny Schmidt, Nancy Justman, and Jody Geenan. Our district has a 7-member board with unnumbered seats. Verification of 4 candidates for 3 seats on the board has been established. Therefore, according to Wisconsin Statute 120.067A and B, a primary election will not be required. On Wednesday, January 8th, 2020, lots were drawn for position on the April 7th, 2020 spring election ballot. Candidate names will appear as follows: Tawny Schmidt, Joel Ongert, Nancy Justman, and Jody Geenan.
Thank you, Tani. On our consent agenda tonight, we have minutes of the January 6th, 2020 regular school board meeting, disbursements posted to February 3rd, 2020, ratification of teacher contracts, a resignation, and pupil non-discrimination report. With that, I'll move to approve our consent.
Second.
Any questions on the consent agenda tonight? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None? Consent agenda passes, Don. There's no turning back now. Our action items to start with tonight, we'll talk about revenues and expenses in the aggregate July through December 2019. And then on deck will be 2020, 2021 capital projects.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board, Superintendent Kierkegaard. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to see if I can't pull a document up real quick. Do we know if it was loaded by any chance? No. I'm going to wait for assistance.
Sure.
Use a lifeline. Sorry about that. As we're waiting, this is probably one of the smoothest quarterly revenues and expenditures in the aggregate that I've seen. As I was reviewing the transactions, and again, this is a familiar document that we'll be seeing, or we have been seeing. We'll continue to say thank you, Tim. And basically, it takes 2 years of history. We have budget as compared to actual, and then it compares that budget to actual for the 1 year, budget to actual for last year at this exact point in time, which is July 1st through December 31st of the same period, and then even compares those two year to date, and tries to just find any variances. And as I'm looking, we have several thousand, in fact, we're approaching 10,000 different line items in our chart of accounts. There are a few holes here and there because the budget's a living document. It's meant to be kind of amended a little bit. The plan often changes from a February, March when you're doing it until almost a year later when transactions are happening. That plan does change on occasion, but as a whole, the way that we set the budget up, both revenues and expenditures for the large majority of our budget. In fact, I don't have one line item in here that I have any concern, but we're tracking exactly as I would anticipate at this point in time. And I think that's due to the time that was spent in developing the budget, those owners of not just the district office personnel, but a lot of all of the schools. People are very diligent right now in taking a look and making sure that they're mindful about how things are being coded and how we're spending the money, and we're just being good fiscal stewards. So I've really been appreciative and enthusiastic about that. 4-page document, again, I break it out with the kind of small borders by fund because that's what we do with our chart of accounts and whatnot. I would like to point out my little blue asterisks here, and again, this is important. I'll probably mention this until somebody tells me to stop. Money in or revenues don't always equal money out. In fact, that's when we take a look at our fund balance and our cash position, why that's so important. It's not a rainy day fund. It is not a savings account or anything like that. It is so much more than that. To date, and we're fiscally solvent, we're exactly where we need to be. Our revenues in is actually short by almost $15 million from where expenditures are going out. That's very typical at this point in time of year. As of December 31st, we get a lot of money that comes in here in December and early January, but that's a really good reason why we think about a healthy fund balance, because it minimizes that need for the short-term borrowing. We did tap into it for a very short period of time, literally a 4-day long weekend, but that's just to exemplify the need for that. Fund 10, again, revenues and expenditures, any local money, grants, we've been doing our claims on a timely basis. Salaries, benefits, we've been paying those bills and paying our staff. Large piece of it is staffing. Everything's been tracking as planned. no variances at all. In fact, we're just maybe a smidge shy on some of our equipment purchases and whatnot. Again, no concern at all, but nothing outside of the bounds of the budget by any means. Fund 21, this is our gift fund. This is what I'd call the student activity accounts. And a lot more activity because there's a new governmental accounting standards board, number 84, that says we have to account for money a little bit differently, putting a little bit more constraints on it and whatnot, so there's more activity. When I do a budget amendment here, when I ask you to approve a budget amendment this spring, we will reflect a new budget, but for the time being, we have to stick what was approved here back at the end of October. Fund 27 is our special education. Again, grants are being claimed timely. Expenses are tracking as planned. No concerns at all. I did have a note there. We did purchase a vehicle here this fall, which is why there's that big increase in the equipment, but that's because we haven't purchased much equipment in past years. So no concerns by any means. It was a budgeted item. Fund 29 is our Head Start. Again, we're from federal money, $1.2 million, tracking exactly as we should be, both on the claims side. In fact, we're doing quite a bit better at this time of year as we were compared to last year. Just some stability in the department and getting on top of those monies. Expenses, literally just tracking right where it needs to be. Fund 38 is our non-referendum debt, and again, revenues and expenditures coming in and out. We've actually receipted some monies at this point in time where we didn't last year. Payments exactly where they need to be because there's November payments for those debt issuances. Fund 39 is our referendum debt, exactly where it needs to be with the schedule of those payments. No concerns at all. Fund 41, which is our capital expansion, so this is where we have our facilities improvements and whatnot. I did point out that it looks as though, hey, we should be a little bit further along in spending that $1.5 million. We will. We will, I know, as we wrap up the fiscal year and as Mr. Ross is looking at bridging into when school finishes up, we will be expending a large majority of the remaining those funds here by fiscal year end. Fund 46. Interest is doing very well and no other activity is planned, even though we have about $500,000 sitting in fund balance that we have at our disposal at some future point in time. Fund 49, this is where we put our Barton money, so you can see that revenue of $520,000 last year. We will have some interest accounting to be booked in this area, but again, this is at the discretion of the board and how we dispose of that money, probably or most likely through some type of facilities improvement, but no real planned activity at this point in time. Fund 50 is our nutritional services, so all the breakfast, lunches, even summer programs and whatnot for our children and staff, but tracking exactly where it needs to be, both on the revenue expenditure side. No concerns at all with them. They're still healthy and doing well. Fund 73 is our post-employment benefit trust, and again, interest is trending very well, even though we've seen some federal deposit decreases in the interest rate. They're still doing well. We've been pretty good about making sure that they're locked in with some CDs and whatnot that are having some decent returns. Tracking our money that's coming in with our retirees that are have this insurance at this point in time. Again, things are doing very well in Fund 73 with our OPEB. Finally, Fund 80, I would probably encourage our middle school sports. They have a little chunk of money that they should be utilizing a little bit more, but we've been using the partnerships between the Y, the Boys and Girls Club, even the police liaisons or school resource officers. That's all been tracking as well, and we've started receiving, or we should be soon here when we receive a property tax payment, some additional revenues to support that. So very clean, very nice report tonight. That being said, I would certainly entertain questions if you have any. It's my favorite kind of report.
Good. I will move to accept the 2019-2020 fiscal year quarter two revenues and expenditures in the aggregate as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, Andy. 2020-2021 capital projects. Mr. Ross.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Last week I presented the 2021 capital projects that we're planning for this upcoming summer. And as I said last week, most of the projects are going to take place at the high school. The biggest project will be the library remodel that we've kind of embarked on. Does anybody have any questions?
I probably should have asked this question when Andy was up here, but it goes into capital projects. $520,655 from the sale of Barton. Is that included into the budget that Mr. Ross is presenting here for next year?
It is not. Those are monies that are above and beyond what Mr. Ross has typically had access to. We did adjust that capital projects budget by $500,000 in addition to the typical 4% that fund has had in the past, but it is not. Barton is outside of that.
And I guess maybe now, a question to you, Superintendent, what are we waiting for as far as spending that money? We've got plenty of capital projects to do.
So it really will be a decision of the board. Do you want to take on another small project, locker rooms, a whatever? Do you want to use it for a larger portion of, if you have a referendum, you're going to use it for some referendum, offset some of those dollars. We could spend it tomorrow because there's a ton of things that can happen. The key is whether you want to expand some of the projects that we're looking at, or do you want to use it for potentially some of the Jackson Fund type accounts where we're offset some future referendum debt.
Okay.
So will that be on a future agenda to discuss then, or?
Yes.
Okay, so as in like the next meeting?
As in, we'll have a little bit on in February at our committee of the whole meeting. We have a budget at that point in time. Dave, want to give us just a real quick update on where we're at with the library as far as the plans looking great, and so we're going to have, you take it away, I don't want to say.
So we have met a couple of times and kind of developed a conceptual floor plan at this stage of the game. We have another meeting on Wednesday of this week. Once we have that meeting and things are a little bit more dialed in, then we'll start getting the design for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing that goes into the space. And we'll also go out and try to solicit some costs for furniture so that we begin to do two things at once. So the construction side will go ahead, and then the furniture side will go ahead at the same time.
Bray will be here at our next meeting to talk a little bit about their plans, the conceptual, and so come ready for questions, and I thoroughly believe you're going to be impressed with what they're going to show you.
Great.
The last 4 items deal with roof replacement.
Yes.
And are those all at the high school building, or are those
They
at
are
a different
all at the
location?
high school building. Yes. And 2 of those, the largest sections, are actually above the library itself. So, again, so we don't renovate a space and then get it wet afterwards.
Any more questions? Am I going to be the one making all the motions tonight? Thank you, Mr. Swigert.
I move to approve, excuse me, I move to approve the 2020-2021 capital projects list and budget of $2,112,237.
Second.
Great, motion and a second. I guess for just further commentary, I'm glad we were able to carve out the 5 additional, close to $600,000 to put in the budget, and hope it can continue to grow. Obviously, the sale of Barton, and that's a one-time revenue, and should be certainly either used for capital projects or to pay off future referendum debt or even current referendum debt. And I would like to discuss that, soon, and what to do with that money. I'm assuming it's not gaining much interest sitting in the account that it is, and how we can put that to good use, at our next committee meeting or board meeting. So, any other commentary, questions? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None? Motion carries.
Thanks very much.
Got a long list of projects to start taking care of there.
I didn't want to have nothing.
That's good. All right, our West Bend East and West Bend West Girls Golf Co-op 2-year agreement renewal. Thanks for coming tonight, Aaron Felber.
So, for the past 10 years, the West Bend golf team for the girls has been a co-op between East and West. This year, we currently have 12 girls on the team, 8 in which are seniors, so we're hoping to get some more girls on the team. But my ask is that we continue to have a co-op team between East and West for girls golf, which the renewal would be then for the next 2 years with the WIA.
I move to approve the 2-year renewal of the West Bend East and West Girls Golf Team Cooperative.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions on the golf agreement? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Our next item is West Bend East and West Bend West Boys Swim and Dive Team Co-op 2-year agreement. Kevin, thank you for being here tonight.
Yes, thanks for having me. On behalf of both myself and the West Athletic Director, it would be our recommendation that we continue to operate our boys swim team as a co-op. It's been a co-op since 2014. This year, our amount of divers was down to 34 from 40 last year. So in order to field a competitive team with full lineups, we do believe that this is a necessity. Thanks.
I move to approve the 2-year renewal of the West Bend East and West Bend West Boys Swim and Dive Team Cooperative.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. 2020 Summer School Program. Jen Kennerman's here tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. Just give me 1 second to get the slides up. All right, so previously shared with you was the presentation shared as well as the exec summary. Our purpose tonight is to really recap 2019 summer school program as well as provide an overview of the 2020 summer school program. Here we have shown the enrollment numbers for students who have signed up for particular classes. You can see in the remediation classes or the standards reading and math classes offered in K through 7, the number of students. Also for retakes, for grades 8 through 12, we had 276. This is an overall summary of each student who signs up. And what ends up happening for our state aid is we get a full-time enrollment number. And that's where I look to Andy to talk a little bit more about the calculation and the state funding.
I often have a cliche saying that everything typically costs money, but it doesn't mean you want me to pick out textbooks and paint colors and stuff like that. But as it relates to summer school, and again, as Jen indicated, we tabulate those minutes, literally the number of minutes. It translates to an FTE, and we had quite a few FTE. And then as a part of the revenue limit calculation, that's then dropped down by 60%. So we're able to calculate 40% of the original FTEs multiplied by our revenue limit, which this year is $9,700. It translates to a dollar amount that's really equal to our revenues. Typically, school districts will have a profit within summer school, and again, which is why they've already dropped the FTE down a little bit. But mainly speaking, those minutes, again, translating to that FTE, that translates to a dollar amount, and then that's really what we're watching and monitoring in order to back into, as they're taking a look at all the expenditures and all those things that go into making a successful program, both for the enrichment as well as the remediation and whatnot. So there's a lot of information that goes into that. We did have total revenues in 2019-20 about $455,000, expenditures $355,000. So when we take a look at the bottom line, it was profitable by approximately $100,000. We've had a few better years. We've had probably, we've just gone back 4 years, potentially some worse years, but by better or worse, numerically speaking, these are just the dollars that go into that. So as long as we stay in the black, I'm pretty happy. What really gets me excited is when Jen, her crew, have that ability to make some success with, again, both the remediation and getting those students caught up, as well as some kids to do some fun and exciting things. Any questions on the finance? I should point out real quick, and I think we left it on there, student fees 0. There was a point in time where we did collect some fees, nominal, $5, $10, something like that. We chose not to. You need to document meticulously how that money is spent by student, by class. it's not worth it, and often it doesn't even really do a whole lot. Mainly salaries, benefits, getting that staff there. We're not incurring a lot of other expenses other than that. So we have not collected a fee here for a number of years. We've not waived, for that matter, on the far right. We've not waived any costs for any outside students or whatnot. We just haven't had that participation. So, but financially speaking, the program is solvent. So.
Great.
So what I'll do is just talk about some highlights for the 2020 program. Like Andy said, it's a great program, and it's free of charge to all of our families, and so we really want to communicate that this is an option for our families. And so I've been working with a small team to really look at just all components of summer school. And what we're doing this year is really trying to clarify those opportunities for students and families. Again, this is free of charge to students currently in 4th grade through 12th grade. We offer summer school sessions, and then camps, and then Jump Start. And we're really trying to narrow down that the summer school camps and Jump Start are two different things throughout the summer. So we have them listed in each area. So if I'm an elementary student, I could go to the summer school session, and then in August, I may find a camp that's about coding, and then I can also go to Jump Start Silverbrook if I'm going to be a Silverbrook student. So there's lots of opportunity for students. We have identified registration dates. The registration dates for 9th through 12th graders will begin on March 2nd, and for 4K through 7th grade will begin on March 9th. The reason for the delay is just because a lot of questions with credit retake, and as the kids talked about the semester being over and finals and everything like that, we do offer a retake of that first semester class if we had a high failure rate. So if a lot of students struggled in a particular class, we then offer that in summer school for the students to earn that half credit again. The registration is open until May 1st. However, for those seniors and high school students, let's say at the end of second semester, we find that there's a lot of students that haven't done well in a certain class and need to retake it. We definitely will be adding that as long as we have the staffing and student capacity or student enrollment for that class, so students have the opportunity. So even though the deadline really is May 1st, that just allows us to do some calculations for staffing on those classes that aren't for credit. The dates are listed below. With no school being on July 3rd, that's a Friday this year. We have a few new components that I want to just highlight. We've been working hard to really boost some excitement around some new classes, some ceramics, a space camp, escape rooms, and some green space, and even some social wellness pieces. Our kindergarten through 7th grade, the reading and math classes are going to be open for all kids. So in the past, a teacher needed to recommend Johnny be a part of summer school reading or math due to whatever reasons, concern, or maybe they haven't met all the standards yet, or they're not quite ready to move on to the next grade. What we're doing is really because we want to continue the learning for all students, we're opening this up to everybody. And so we want to encourage you that as you talk with families and students throughout the community, that you're encouraging them to really be a part of this learning. So those classes are open for all kids, and what we're going to do is make sure that they have good reading materials as well as a variety of resources with the teachers so that they're getting their just right text at the level that they need. So we're excited about that one. Another change for this year, the summer school times in the session. In the past, the sessions were either 4-week or 5-week. Most of the 4-week sessions were for a retake class like we had talked about earlier. With that, the students would earn a half credit. And then the 5-week classes were for credit advancement, so the students were still earning a half credit. And I'm new to summer school this year, and so as we're just looking to find out like the ins and outs of everything, we're just really trying to find out why we decided what things. And so when I looked at the minutes from last year as far as the requirements from DPI for 2019, I'm making the recommendation, and we've talked as the cabinet team about the 5-week sessions for the high school to meet the minute requirement. So only 5-week classes for the high school level that result in a half a credit. New this year, we'll have personal finance that's for credit advancement, that's in class, but also virtually. Additionally, I provided a link to you of just a work in progress of what we have as a summer school guidebook. We're working to really clean that up and make it really user-friendly. I've been working with Nancy Kunkler on the website so that when we have the registration open, that it will be easy to use and people can register very quickly. Here's a screenshot of just what an overview would look like. Transportation, we have some predetermined pickup spots to get kids to and from. It does not include door-to-door, from the school to the home for every child. Only students with specific needs would have that transportation provided. Here's what a screenshot of one of the pages would look like as far as the offerings. We offer just the course name as well as the current grade of students that it's most appropriate for. So with that, you have the link to the handbook that we've been working on. As I said, it's in almost complete form, but if there are classes to be added from the high school level, we'll definitely need that flexibility to add those classes. One other thing I've worked on with Nancy Kunkler is just a little bit of the advertising. So we made these postcards. We're going to make sure that our 4K families and other people have the information so that they're taking advantage of the opportunity. Questions, discussion?
Jen, can you clarify, you mentioned that this is open to all residents, students that reside in the district. What about those who might open enroll in?
Yes, there's an open enrollment process, and Nancy Deffenbaugh, what happens is we already have like 3 students who would be potentially open enrolled, but then open enrollment time is not yet. It comes after this registration. So typically what happens is the parents call the summer school registrar, Linda, and really say, we're interested in this. Our intention is to open enroll, and providing that everything moves forward and they're accepted, that sort of thing, then we just hold those spots. And we just make a note that those students, are interested, and if the open enrollment or something happens and they don't come, then we open them up to other students. But a lot of the students who are open enrolled, they're really interested in Phi-Ed, and that fills up fast. So we try and save a spot or two as soon as they start to, call and say they're interested.
Great. Any more questions?
I move to approve offering a 2020 summer school program for students in grades 4K through grade 12.
Second. Motion and a second. Any questions, comments, discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Some of our next steps will be circulating these flyers and registration. So as you talk to people, please let them know and remind them that we have this summer school that's really open to all kids. We're trying to get some new classes, so it's a really good experience for all the kids.
Great. We'll move on to some policy fast-track recommendations, and I know Laura's going to take us through that, and maybe Chris Swire can help as well. And then we've got a third reading on another board policy following that. So turn it over to you, Laura.
Thank you. So the policy committee met on January 20th, and discussed several policies. Under item F, there are several policies were recommended for fast track, meaning the changes to them were small. They did not change the meaning or the content of the policy. May have been grammatical changes, updating format, or may have been changing from district administrator to superintendent, or Board of Education to school board. Some relatively small changes, and the policy committee felt that they were ready for fast track. Are there any questions on those?
Nope. You want to make the motion there, Chris?
I move to approve the fast track recommendation of policies 345.4 promotion, placement and retention, 345.4A acceleration, 345.5 physical education 1/2 credit exemption, and 345.11 class rankings.
Second. Any more questions, comments, discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Those policies carry. Next one's a third reading of revised board policy 343.3 class size.
Last board meeting, this was on for second reading. We pulled it and said, let's go back because some of the changes we had previously discussed were not reflected in the final copy that the board had received. So this policy has been re-looked at by the policy committee and then is brought forward again for now the third reading. Are there any questions on the class size policy?
I move to approve revised board policy 343.2 class size.
Second. Any questions, comments, discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Discussion items tonight, a few more policies that we've been taking a look at. First reading of revised board policy 346, district testing program, 347, family educational rights and privacy records, 422.1, foreign exchange programs, and 345.1, grade point average.
So again, these policies were discussed in policy committee on January 20th. They had more substantial changes and so therefore are brought forward at this time for discussion. Policy committee was comfortable in bringing them forward with the changes that are indicated in the markings being made. With several of the policies, we went back to a WASB version of the policy and or incorporated WASB language with some of our current language. Are there any questions on any of the policies?
This serves as a first reading of these policies, so we won't vote on them tonight, but the foreign exchange policy was actually a change that was kind of brought to our attention by a member of our community who hosts a cultural exchange student, and has hosted several of them, in fact, and noticed something in our policy that wouldn't allow her to do that, or just we were making exceptions in the past, and so it was kind of a cool way that that policy was brought to the school board. So.
I guess question for Laura or whomever, do our neighboring districts, I'm noticing in the, let me get the right number, policy 345.1, academic achievement, grade point average, beginning with the class of 2024 and all subsequent classes, physical education courses will be factored into the GPA. How does that compare to our neighboring districts? Are they already factoring it in and this is a change we're going to make in the future, or how are we comparing?
That's correct. Our neighboring districts and Mr. Slass, pretty much the whole North Shore, we are the only ones. The whole conference factors FIED into the GPA. And so this is a change for us, but brings us in line with our neighboring districts. With the class of 2024, that's the incoming ninth graders for next year. And so that's why it would begin with that class.
Good question.
They could take this class in summer school.
I'll let them know if I know any incoming ones.
They can take it in summer school and
Yeah,
for a
credit
GPA credit, yeah, cool. If there's no more discussion on this, then we will see these again at our next board meeting for a second reading. The next one is a deletion of board policy 345.4B, retention.
As we were reviewing policies and what was coming up, we realized that we had previous discussion which then separated out the acceleration policy and the promotion retention policy. Once those policies were approved, we realized we never brought this one back to delete. So it is redundant with our other policies and was therefore brought back for deletion.
Any questions on this one? Again, if there's not, we'll bring it back for a second reading. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our report section of our agenda tonight with Superintendent Kierkegaard on the high school forensics budget update.
If you remember at our last board meeting, we had several forensic students here talking about a possible reduction in their budget. We didn't think that was 100% accurate, but they didn't do it to mislead anybody. They were just believing that their budget had been reduced. And reality is that they had overspent it a little bit the year before, and so we were just trying to bring them in line with the approved budget as opposed to the expenses that occurred. We have notified the forensics program that the budget for 2019-20 would actually be the expenses for 18-19. So we increased the budget for this year so that it reflects the expenses from last year. And as we go forward, we're going to need to look at our budget, either increase the revenue portion of it or decrease the expenses so that they are in line with the revenue, or a combination of the two. But for the remainder of this year, we have came up with the funds to make sure that there is no reduction. We'll be able to do the same programs that we had last year, and then we'll need to make an adjustment for the following year, either with revenue or with expenses, or a combination of the two.
Thank you. I guess for clarification, so we don't have anyone at home or someone who might be waiting in the hallway, how was this information communicated to the students, or I guess more so the advisor? I just want to make sure that the proper information was put out there for everyone to know.
As soon as we had figured out what happened, the principal or principals talked to the advisors to make sure that they knew that the money from last year was going to be the same as for this year was the same as it was last year. So there was a one-to-one communication with the advisors to make sure that they knew that they would have the same amount of money this year that they had last year, or that they spent last year.
And then just one further point of clarification, I guess for future reference, I think it's important that, for instance, the coaches or the leaders of these groups have some kind of conversation with their principal or whomever at the very start of the year. So we're not kind of, here with our hair on fire at the 11th hour saying we need to pay for things. I have no problem with students doing brat fries and whatnot, but if they don't know until the last minute, that's hard to come up with those funds. So I would encourage that our administrators at the high school to make sure that they've reached out to all their programs so that they fully understand what their budget requirements and I guess top of the line number is.
Yep. Absolutely correct. I do believe that that conversation took place as early as August, and so that it wasn't a last-minute conversation. There certainly might have been some confusion with that, but it wasn't a November discussion that you don't have money for December. It was a early discussion, but clarification, and so not blaming anyone. We just need to make sure that going forward, we either have revenue that aligns with expenses or expenses that align with revenue.
I got one final question, just on, for the public in general, or just even the people in the room and myself, the reason for the budget being spent over what it was. I'm just hearing through all the answers, maybe two reasons. One, we have a lot of students from how many students were here and speaking, and two, they were very successful. So an increased number of students and successful competitions. So they go to state, they go to national competitions. All that requires judges, entry fees. So I'm assuming because of our success, the number of students in the program, our spend is going up. Is that a correct assumption?
That certainly is part of the assumption. You're absolutely correct. It's not like there's just one item in the forensics. There might be 4 or 5 different line items, and so one maybe was overspent and the other one was underspent, and so bottom line is we overspent the budget, and our overall budget is for our high school activities, and that was by no means overspent. But the forensic part was, but Kurt, you are correct in that if we had more kids competing and they have more judges and more entry fees, then at least part of our solution is going to be to certainly increase the revenue as opposed to reduce the expenses, because the more kids you have, the more it costs for that kind of program.
Yeah, I'll just like to say finally, for the kids that presented, if they're listening online, they at least did themselves proud and put their professional learning in school to actually use in a public setting. So I just thank those kids and the instructor.
You learn early on, you don't argue with debaters, because you're going to lose the argument, especially the quality of debaters that we had that night.
Good. Paul, did you have a question?
Just wanted to clarify on the budget side, so this was solely the co-curricular portion of the budget. There wasn't any cross-coding of funds, be it, BRAT-5 funds or concession sales and so forth. So this was just what came from the school budget.
I'm looking at Andy, and he's shaking his head. That is correct.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the follow-up on that. Our next report is on grading for learning, and this will be Laura Jackson.
Good evening. There are several others who are joining me tonight. We had planned this presentation really to talk about and provide some information for the board on grading for learning in our school district. While we had prepped and prepared for this presentation, we are fully aware that the board received some letters from some of our teachers this weekend, and so I want to acknowledge that. And as a result, I've reordered some of the things in the presentation since the original presentation was posted. So you're going to notice that the presentation that's up on the screens is different from the one in board docs based on the order. Additionally, some of the items that that were present in the links in the presentation on board docs so that we could pull it up, we just put those in the slides so that they are clear what part of that spreadsheet we are actually talking about.
Can you please send us the proper, whatever you're going to be presenting tonight afterwards?
Sure, yeah, I'll share that later. They don't have their computers with them. We will do that after the meeting, surely. Okay, so I would just want to take a few minutes to kind of talk about our purpose for the presentation today and provide some just overarching definitions of the purpose of grading and the purpose of reporting. So we use grading to indicate student progress along the way. It allows students to receive feedback. It helps teachers to modify their instruction because you're doing checks of understanding along the way. So that might be grading of assignments, grading of presentations, projects. They're graded along the way during the course of units of study, during the course of a semester or a year-long course. The purpose of reporting out, or those grade products for the report card, is really to provide information on specific achievement targets, achievement of specific learning targets that students have attained based on all of the evidence collected from those assignments, from assessments, from other displays of knowledge and skills. This is really used to inform students, parents, and others as far as the students' grade and what they've attained at various points. So others might include universities or scholarship applications. Those are some of the others that are used. Is that what you're going to ask? Yep. Thank you. Yes. My mind. Wow. Like, where are the others? So this update will include some information on the grading practice and process that we're talking about as far as grading for learning. We'll talk about the professional development that our teachers received, highlight some of the parent communication, the next steps. Our administrators have been significant in leading their buildings forward in this process, and some of our teachers are here who had prepared to talk with you tonight. This originally was near the end of the presentation, so we have had a lot of conversation around Future Forward, a district rollout process. Originally, when we first talked about this in 2018, during my time here, we had laid out a more expedited process than this one. So we've been doing some revisions along the way. As you can see, and after you've received the letters you received, we need to go back and have some further discussion about this. We need to obviously talk a little bit more about common understandings, common beliefs with our system as a whole. And so this district-wide rollout process option that you had, that was the one that was highlighted in the slide presentation you received. Again, we're going to come back around and have further discussion about this.
Hang on, I'm totally confused. So right now, we have students in the high school who already are having this type of grade, whatever you want to call it, grading for learning. I know it's happening in some core classes, and I understand it's also happening in some electives, but you're showing that it's not happening until 22, 23.
For the whole, for system-wide, for
So-
ninth grade, for everyone in ninth grade.
So,
would be
okay,
22.
so do you have a slide in here that will tell us exactly what's happening to our students right now?
Correct.
Okay, I didn't see that, so I'm assuming you're gonna get to
Part
that
of
next.
Well, not immediately next, but in this, yes. So we have had a focus on grading practices within our system. I would remind you that West Bend School District was one of the leaders in the state in the mid-90s when the state was developing the state standards for instruction in all areas. Particularly you had people on the science team who then led out the statewide implementation of those standards. So going back to 1995, the teachers in West Bend and some of the leadership were leaders within the state in this area. So I looked back at some documentation going back to 2001 within the system that talked about grading committees really being site-focused, site-based conversations about what the grades meant and how students were being assessed, and then similar things happening in grade level meetings. That work continued along the way. It included the focus for when the district went to a philosophy of continuous improvement. The continuous improvement philosophy is one that has you looking consistently, coming back around, looking at progress made. So how that looked for a student at the student level was really emphasizing how important that identification of standards is, how important that learning target is. And we know that that has a significant effect size, meaning the outcomes from just identifying the learning target at the beginning of a lesson, coming back and generalizing around that is significant in increasing student achievement. So the continuous improvement process had everybody collecting baseline data, providing learning experiences around that, working with the students so that the students were tracking their own data and self-assessing, receiving feedback, and then continuing with the PDSA cycle. From 2015 to 2017, there was a clear focus group that was formed that really went through a lot of research on grading and was bringing for having discussions about the revisions to the elementary report card specifically. They had talked and discussed at other levels. In the 2017-18 school year, small tweaks were made to the elementary report card, which included all of elementary being graded as ESN, which previously only the reporting out on the report card was switched to ESN for all of elementary. So 2018, we began the plan for gradual implementation. 2019, we're in the process of revising that plan for implementation. We have already once revised the plan unveiled in 2018. So with that revision process again, as I shared with that rollout plan, we're continuing conversation around that. So as of right now and moving forward, we'll continue to have some more discussion. That option that was presented again is not considered final yet. One of the 2019 other things that happened during the 2019 school year, Ralph and I had participated in a panel of university representatives from multiple Wisconsin state universities, including Superior, Green Bay, Milwaukee, Madison, as well as some of the other smaller affiliates. There were tech colleges represented and private colleges, including Marquette. And during that panel discussion, there was a lot of conversation around what is it you're looking for from us. And there were three key pieces that had emerged from that. One of them being they were flat out asked by another district about their grading for learning and how that impacts student admissions. Those, the panel went down the row and talked about how when they receive the students' GPA and their transcript, they're looking for those letter grades. That's easy for them, then they can make their call. If they have a 1, 2, 3, 4 system, that's more difficult for them to make their call. And one second, I need to refresh this again. That is more difficult for them to make their call. We have always stated as we're going through this process that we are not moving away from letter grades at the 7-12 level, and that has never been the focus of the district. We've always maintained that we will retain the A, B, C, D, F that we currently have at those levels. The other key piece from the universities, one was that letter grades make it easy for them. 2, yes, GPA calculations make it on transcripts, make that easy for them. They recognize that an A across districts does not mean the same thing. Some districts are 95 to 100, some are 93 to 100 is an A, some are 90 to 100 is an A. Additionally, how those grades are calculated to get to that A is significantly different besides the percentage. And they recognize that. The letter system is just something they can use. The third thing, question about university level, was what universities are using this type of grading system, and they vary significantly. Alverno is the only university that is completely proficiency based, and that meaning your learning continues until you've demonstrated that you have that. Every other university, whether it's a UW system or a private school, has different expectations around grading depending on the college that you're talking about. So within the School of Business, they may have a different grading standard than the School of Education. And so you see that in the syllabuses, and you see that in the how the specific classes are graded. There will be different expectations, also based on the purpose of the class. So, the universities acknowledge that the purpose of some of their classes is to sort individuals out. So the grading expectations are built based on that, sorting out really who's a really high achiever from those who are average achievement. The other thing that it depends, it varies by department and by course, and again by level, by the difficulty of the class as they rise, as students rise through their programs. The courses tend to be graded more on a competency based. So think of a nursing program. When you're going into clinicals, you are graded more on competency that you've demonstrated than straight up quizzes and test scores.
Well, just a quick comment on that, but the nursing exam that you take is clearly a test.
Oh, yeah.
The final test that you take to get your license is clearly a test.
Correct. Yep.
I just wouldn't want anyone at home to think that it's all based on, can you give me a shot. It's actually a real test where they're doing
Yep,
real
their
work and
boards
real math,
are-
and there's a pass-fail to it.
Correct. The things that are in progress. If you recall, when the original calendar for the 2020 to 2021 school year was adopted, it was all, the shift back to semesters for the system as a whole was also made. So during the course of this year, a team has been meeting about the transition for kindergarten through 6th grade from trimesters to semesters. And so that work has been going on. The K-6 team is continuing to work on those transition details, and that, of course, will require an adjustment to the report card. There has been a lot of feedback from the group on that process and what all needs to happen. And so this week they're going to be looking at some samples with regard to that. So again, additionally, the 712 report card will continue to utilize the A, B, C, D, F. There's no intention to change that. We are talking about how does a teacher determine a student's grade and how does a teacher grade assignments.
So do we use the 1 through 4 in the day-to-day application and then somehow back into A through F?
Correct. So we're going to go through that now.
Okay.
All right. So Kevin's going to come on up and talk through some of those steps. And go ahead, Kevin.
Good evening, everyone. All right. So, I'm not too loud, am I? I don't want to be screaming into the, okay. You never know like where to start when you're talking. So, so basically when we think about grading for learning, it is the philosophy of how we look at grading and assessment. So you see there's 3 main tenets up there: grading practices, assessment literacy, and standards reference grading. Okay, so that is what we strive to be. It is important to note that many of the things that are included in these tenets are things that we've already been doing for, in some cases, several years to many years. Okay, so we're going to go over each one of these really quickly. We're going to have Monica Green from Silverbrook come up here to talk about one of them and actually show you some examples of what it looks like in the classroom. But the first thing we want to talk about is grading practices. So when we look at grading practices, we want to make sure that in general, when our kids are in classes, no matter what teacher they have, that there is consistency in how they are graded and how they are assessed. Because at the high school, as we all know, you know, grades do matter, right? They're for scholarships, they're for transcripts. So we want to make sure that teachers have common ways of assessing kids. And just going back to, you know, my career, I've been in education for 15, 20 years. I can't remember the actual number as I'm saying it here right now. But as I look back, like at my colleagues when I started teaching, not in West Bend, but there were some teachers that gave extra credit every day. There were some teachers that didn't allow retakes. There were some teachers that, you know, had these policies but not those policies. And when you look at that, that's not really a fair and equitable thing. So when we talk about grading practice, we want to have consistency amongst all of our teachers. Not that we're making cookie cutter teachers, but that we do have common expectations. So one of the things that Grading for Learning is doing is that we're looking to make sure that our teachers do have common expectations for certain standards so that we can feel better about the grades being equivalent from classroom to classroom. The other thing that we're doing with Grading for Learning as far as grading practices go is we're defining what a grade is, okay? In the past, we've had lots of behaviors that are included in a grade. So if a student didn't turn something in, they would get a 0, okay? That's not showing what they do or don't know, but it's showing that there was a behavior that got in the way. So in this system, we take all the behaviors out of the final grade. Now, it doesn't mean that behaviors aren't important. In fact, one of our plans moving forward is to report out on behaviors separately. We're going to take it out of the grade, but we're going to report out separately. We want to make that a more of a focus. So when we talk about employability skills and things of that nature, we want to be able to report out to students and parents, here's how your child is doing with one of these kind of lifelong skills, okay? We also want to make sure that when we're looking at our grading practices, that we look at formative assessments not necessarily being a big part of the grade. So this is an example of a policy that's been in place for several years. We made the shift from at the high school in Badger where formatives can be no more than 10% of the grade. Okay, so that's one of the kind of philosophies that we've put into place. Another one of the practices that we put in place is retakes. So a student can choose to retake a test. That's been in place for several years now, longer than I've been here. I've been here for 5 years. That's been a policy that's been in place for several years. It's up to teacher discretion what that looks like for a student to reassess. I will say when we look at our pilot teachers, we don't see a lot of retakes happening at this time, which hopefully is because of a lot of other good practices that are taking place.
How easy is it for a student to get a retake? Is it at their own discretion, or the teachers need to evaluate if the person was sick, or
Yeah, I mean, so it varies from teacher to teacher. I mean, ideally, philosophically, when a student doesn't do well on assessment, that means they didn't learn, right? And so one of the things we want to kind of ask ourselves as a system is that okay? And we want, obviously, we don't want some of our students to learn a certain math standard and some too. So it is at teacher discretion. I can say that a lot of times, a lot of our students don't have an interest in retaking, is some of the feedback that I've gotten from some of the pilot teachers in the system, where they've actually started to encourage more kids to go ahead and take people up on that.
Take people up on doing a retake?
I'm sorry, to have, yeah, have kids take them up on retaking something that they did poorly on.
I guess I philosophically disagree with that, especially at the high school level, because that's not preparing them for career readiness.
Retaking a test?
Yeah, because, I mean, it's just, I can just see that being abused. And
so all the teachers at that chose to do the grading for learning at Badger, if they allow retakes, when they allow retakes, there's a process that they have to go through, and the process is some of the soft skills, like the studying, doing the work behind the work, and they have to show that in one way or the other. I give the teachers the autonomy of what that process is and how it fits in their classroom, but the student has to show that they've earned the right to retake whatever the assessment was.
And one of the things I do like about what you're saying is the common expectations across all teachers. If each teacher has their own set of criteria, then that's not really
Essentially, it's so it's going to be different. It could be a little different for a science classroom that's lab-based and performance-based versus a math classroom. That it may be a little more pencil paper. So it's really how that fits into A, what standard we're looking at, and then B, what was the assessment exactly.
But we could say that as a consistent standard, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to retake that test and here you go, another copy, and away you go. There is a gate you need to get over, because I agree with Tony that, from the employability side, and again, I get it at the middle school level, but, we talked in the last board meeting about the former English honors program at 8th grade, where 8th graders could take that, but it didn't count towards their GPA because maybe they weren't ready, we didn't want to rock the boat. Well, now we're going the other way, saying you're in high school, we're going to let you do all this stuff, and I'm afraid we're doing our students a huge disservice by not setting them up for what comes in college, what comes in the military, the workforce, that you got to be here at 8 o'clock, you got to turn your stuff in, and, oh, that's okay, we're just going to, coddle you. We can't afford to do that.
I mean, I would point out, too, that in the real world, use the military as an example. When our soldiers are being trained, there are competencies that they have to know. They don't just let them move on and not know something. When you take the nursing exam and you fail it the first time, you're not done forever. You get to retake it again, and that's the same for the law field, for the medical field. So I think there's a pretty strong precedent for it in the real world. You do get multiple opportunities if you failed the first time. I do get the point, though, as far as teacher work capacity. Our teachers are humans. They have lives. They have to go home. So we can't have abuse where kids are just asking to retake constantly, because that's a lot of work for the teacher, because they have to, redo assessments. They have to put new questions, and sometimes it's not easy for them to do that. So this is not like one of those carte blanche things where it's like you can retake something 10 times as often as you want. That's not something we would want to encourage at all. So that's a lot of work for our teachers.
And you said that we don't have a lot of students taking advantage of the retake opportunities. So if somebody gets a 1 on a formative assessment, I really don't care, I'm not going to come in and take the retake, well, then what?
Right. So it's a good segue into what I was about to say next. So when we look at our assessments, a summative assessment is an assessment of learning. So the learning has already taken place. We're seeing where the kids are at. A formative assessment is meant to be an assessment for learning. So a teacher gives a formative assessment. It can be formal, it can be informal, but it should be strategic, right? The teacher is basically looking to see how the kids are doing, how are they progressing, right? So if a student does get a 1 on a formative assessment, that's where we want to make sure that there's feedback in place for that student to get the feedback they need to keep progressing. Does that make sense?
Said by a different name, I'd call that a quiz.
Right, so it's all, quizzes definitely can be formative to see how they're doing and how they're learning the content and or the skill. Absolutely.
I agree with that at elementary level and middle school level, but I think at high school level, kids, they know if they're getting it or not. You know, I guess it just seems like a lot of work at the high school level for the teachers that's taking them away from actually presenting information and presenting material. It just seems like a lot of busy work to tell them what the kids probably already know.
Well, and I would question the students who probably really need to be retaking these tests probably aren't, just as you stated. I mean, students who are typically not achieving or aren't coming in for extra help have already decided, I don't really care. Correct? I see a lot of teachers in the audience. I mean, if my student or you have a student who's getting a D or an F, they're probably not the ones coming in. It's probably the one who's got a C minus who's biting their fingernails going, oh, I really need to get a B in this class. So I can appreciate the thought process, but I would question how it's really helping our lower achieving students with this type of setup.
Well, and I'll take the other side of that. My daughter was in Dave Tolma's AP Gov class last year. Very confusing, trying to understand the grading scale, and I get that part of that may just be the transition from what I know to something new. Change is difficult, but she's also in Senora Krieger's Spanish 5 class. And maybe there's more in this statement that you and I need to talk about, Senora, but she's not all that challenged this year because of how things are being scored. So now you've got a valedictorian, not challenged. You've got those who need this that aren't leveraging the opportunity. Call it what you want. Quizzes, formative assessments, finals, cumulatives, whatever. I see this, the little bit of reading that I was doing on it, arose by any other name. We're coming up with a different grading model. We're incurring a lot of change on behalf of the teachers, and the value add, I think, is at best marginal from what I've read of districts that have tried this. I don't know.
I think it's a good time to bring Monica up here because she can talk about some of the benefits of using feedback and using some of these formative assessments in the classrooms. So Monica, you're gonna hand some stuff out here, right?
I can. Do you have the
Yep.
connections up?
Yep.
So I'm implementing this at the 5th grade level, so it's a different discussion than what this translates to the high school.
Absolutely.
But I will say that if done well at this level, we are hopefully able to start to turn some of the kids' attention to their own learning and try to get them to connect to their own learning. I don't know how that's going to go right now. I'm seeing a positive change in my classroom in the 10-year-olds, but again, that's a ways away from a high school system. We started this process by looking at the standards in 5th grade, going through all of the standards, and another teacher, a special ed teacher, and a coach and I looked at the proficiency levels on each standard and the depth of knowledge. So this is an example of a chart that's up in our classrooms. With the kids, we go over what a proficient answer for a specific standard is. In math, it's a lot easier because there is I got it, I don't got it, I got a lot of it, but we're able to come up with a proficient answer. This is what we're looking for proficiency, so they know where that target is. We then talk forward to advanced, so how could we show that a student has more depth of knowledge on a skill, and then back to the approaching or the beginning. These charts are in our classrooms at all times, and we're constantly addressing them as we go through our formative assessments. The kids become proficient at identifying their proficiency, so they're really good at saying, or they're getting really good at saying, I think I'm approaching right now because of this, and they can show me the information that shows that they're on their way there. I don't know how to get to that. Yeah. It's way too fancy for me. A couple of the other things that I brought are, that one. This is the document that we worked on where we identified our proficiency levels, where we started with what would proficient on each standard be, and then how does that apply up or down on that scale. So this is what we use to go through each of these giant posters that we address with the kids. Okay, now what did you do? Yep. And then this is the document that I use to guide the student learning throughout, so they know where their proficiency level is at any given time. I did a lot of training in personalized learning, and this is key to that connection. So on every assessment that I give, on every class task I give, the kids are self-assessing themselves. They're assessing themselves as they take the assessment, where they think they are. I do my grading, and then I go back and they reassess themselves on this document, which we call our Personalized Learning Plan, a PLP. And so you can see sideways, apparently. The kiddos give their score, and then I conference with each of them relatively quickly to show them where I graded them, and we talk about the difference between their score and my score. We should be aligned if they are reflective thinkers. The further away we are, the less reflective of their own learning they are. One thing that we had to put in was our conceptual mistakes versus precision mistakes. When we talk about those employable skills, understanding that just because you're proficient, if you are making multiplication errors, that needs to be addressed at some point. So when I'm entering these into Skyward, I'm putting in there typically they had a conceptual error or they had a precision error. And we've been working really hard with the kids to identify how does something become a conceptual error, how does something become a precision error. So that's tying in our math standards as well.
Concept being understanding the subject matter, and precision being how consistent are they in execution. Okay.
What we call the silly errors in 5th grade terms. You know, are you making a silly error? Yes, yes. Because when we took that out for the first couple of units, we, Patrick Belfiore and I have worked on this together. We had a lot of discussions about, is this kiddo a 2 or a 3 then? Because they multiplied 3 times 5 and got 10, which as a 10-year-old is not that far off from life for them right now. We also have put problems like that on the board and had the discussions with the kids, let the kids lead the discussions, like what would you grade this score? And so they're getting a lot better at that reflective nature of thought through this. There's a couple other documents that I have linked on here, tests and quizzes, where my grading on students has gotten a lot more broad thinking about standards. I've always been a very standard-driven teacher, but my ability now to look at a standard instead of problem number 4 has been very beneficial for our conversations with the kids. So, and as a teacher, it's a lot quicker to say they're either proficient or they're back a little bit or they're up a little bit, depending on what our guidelines are for those. As far as communications with the parents, it's a lot for them. It's that change, but coming from 4th grade to 5th grade, our parents don't know what letter grade, our parents do, our kids don't know what letter grades are. And so that conversation every year we've had to have, now we've taken that out and we're continuing on our version of the ES or N. So our version is that proficiency level. So those conversations are better, and I feel like what I communicate with families is a lot more understanding of math than you are a B math student. They now know exactly what they know and what they don't know. And then for retakes, my kids know that the post-test is the first grade that I look at in the grade book when I talk about their overall proficiency level. So anything formative, we don't need the quizzes, we don't need to go back and fix those, we need to talk about the skill. And then you're going to show me on the next assessment that you are able to prove that skill. It guides my small groups, it guides my acceleration opportunities for those kids that got it, and it gives a lot more benefit to a pretest when I give a pretest.
Excuse me, Monica, I know you guys do a lot of work, and you've done an excellent job, and I visit with Lance, he will say that over and over again. He's very pleased with how things are going. My question for you is, what comes first, the change in your teaching to a mass customization, individual learning concept, or the grading component, or is it hand in hand? Do you have to change your teaching strategy before you change your grading strategy, or do they go hand in hand?
I do think that the identification of your teaching, that philosophical change does have to happen. Again, because I was on the personalized learning teams years ago and have watched how this all plays out and has added to my conferencing with my students, that's been very beneficial. But even as far as homework, the discussion of homework is such a messy discussion when it comes to this. And until teachers have that similar philosophy, those discussions may get a little tricky when we talk about the commonality between the classrooms.
Do you think your fifth grade math students are better prepared for sixth grade math versus another fifth grade colleague that isn't doing this?
I do think that they are way more aware of what they know and what they don't know, and are able to vocalize it, and not just by standard NBT 7. They're able to say, I understand the standard algorithm for multiplication. You know, if I want to be advanced, because we have a large population right now of advanced math students that have a lot of knowledge, they now know right where they can push themselves to move their math forward without saying I have to be in an accelerated class. So I think that they have a lot more depth of knowledge of the standards themselves. Not all of them, they're 10, but most of them, many of them.
So Monica, if I'm a parent, my traditional model, I look on Skyward, I see missing assignments, I see grades, I see how they're doing. In this model, what do I see?
I've chosen to still put the assignments in because that's important for parents to see when they're completing the homework. My caveat to that is I need to be better at customizing the homework, because true grading for learning is that students aren't just doing a general homework assignment, they're doing it based off of a standard that they need. That being said, I put it in just as a check or a missing. Did they do it or not? So parents are still able to track the missing assignments, and we still work as hard as we can to get those turned in. When they look at Skyward right now, it is a large amount of information that shows on an assessment, and I do put my formatives in there so that parents can watch that number change. So if they look at a particular standard, they might see 2 quizzes that say that they're a 2 and then they were a 3 the next time, and then a post-test on mastery skills. So our program is broken down that certain skills are mastery and certain are developing depending on the time of year. So the conversation with the kids is hopefully going home to the parents. We have had a ton of discussions with the parents at conferences so that they understand it is very similar to the 4th grade report card, but there's a lot more meat to it that, again, hopefully those kiddos are internalizing, and the parents, but the kiddos. So we're pushing for that. Look for the post-test score and then work your way backwards from there.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
It sounds like you enjoy this.
Nerdily, yes.
Nerdily, yes.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to jump to a conclusion on whether or not it's working or not. But maybe a question for Laura. I mean, can we have a hybrid in our system? Can we have kindergarten through 6th grade doing grading for learning activities like Monica is, and then once you get into the middle school or high school, or maybe it's K through 8 and then the high school is different?
Short answer, yes. Absolutely, we can do that. And as we're moving through, in my past experience, students, as they are really focused on their learning and what they know they're able to do and what that target is, that drives a lot of shifts.
Mhm.
So, but yes, absolutely, we can have different things at different levels. And we currently have that.
Yeah. My kid just is in 6th grade now, and had I seen this type of report on him for math, that could have determined whether or not I would have put him in summer school. Because he's not moving on to division unless he masters multiplication and so forth. And so I think I see a nice value in it. But I also agree with what my board colleagues say. Sometimes when you get to the high school, boy, if you don't turn in an assignment, you don't get a second chance in the real world. And we have kids in the high school who simply don't care about mastering or being proficient and whatever. So
That
anyway.
is one of the overall things we need to address as a system. We talk about our student engagement, and and I think every system continuously looks at that because that is essential. And realistically, that's one of the most important things we teach them at that level is, one, again, they're still 14 to 18 or 14 to 21. They are still our responsibility, and we are teaching them the value of being engaged and what that brings forward. And Again, this high schools, as you know, is looking closely at really how are they increasing that student engagement overall.
If I could just add, I think, because I sent a 17-page dissertation with my 4,000 questions, my biggest complaint about this entire process is that you suddenly have ninth graders who have never had this type of grading before in their lives. You've thrown them into high school where they're trying to gain GPAs, they're trying to get into colleges, apply for scholarships, etc., and now you've thrown something else at them. Had my child had this starting in 5th grade, or anyone's child for that matter, and gone down the 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, now as a freshman, we as parents and the students are all inclined to understand this process. But what you've done now is you've taken students and you've slammed them their freshman year in core classes as well as elective classes with a whole different system that doesn't match up with the other grades. And I, as a parent, go to look on Skyward to try and help my student, and I see sometimes nothing has been added since November. So now it's the end of December, and how am I supposed to know where's my student? And when I question my student doesn't know where they are. So this whole rollout has been poor at best for freshmen. I'm not arguing 5th grade, middle school. I am sure the rollout was much better, but you cannot make that many changes to a student's grading situation and not expect parents and students and school board members to have questions for you. This, the whole way it's been rolled out to freshmen, I just don't believe is the proper way to handle this, and I don't agree with you that it's fair and equitable. Because you have some freshmen, if I have Mrs. Smith who's doing your grading for learning, and I have Mr. Johnson who's not, now you have 2 freshmen who had completely different grading systems happening to them their freshman year. And what about if those 2 freshmen become seniors and they're about to both be valedictorians? And now I'm the parent and I'm like, hold up, my kid got the raw deal freshman year. I think we have a serious problem with the way you rolled this out.
We're going to take a look at some grading systems in the next few slides. And so let's, so again, the grading system that we're going to be using is standards referenced, meaning in a true standards-based, it is more like what Alverno does, that you are working until you have mastery. We still have some time-bound constraints that we will not be moving to something as dramatic as that. I don't anticipate ever. I am going to skip ahead, and because I want to be able to address the topic of how our grades calculated and look at some comparisons for that. One of the questions asked is what are other districts in Wisconsin that are currently using a standards referenced or grading for learning, a target-based grading system. Those are different names used throughout Wisconsin as they describe this type of grading system. And this slide reflects districts that are currently using it. We have not connected with all 422 districts. You can see our the 10 largest districts. If it falls in that one of the 10 largest in Wisconsin, it is bolded on there. And that's what the bolding means.
And specifically, they're using this at the high school level, all of these schools that you have listed.
There is, Madison is through middle school.
But everyone else is using this in high school. Should I call Waukesha and they'll say, yes, we use this?
Waukesha uses it.
Across the board, for every single class.
Correct. Waukesha went to that model, right?
2008 or 2009.
And it's the 1 through 3 model or 4 model?
I believe
or
they still
do
report out on their report cards as A, B, C, D, F. They still report out that on their report cards. But they're, I mean, if you want me to pause and then go in, I can pull up their mastery scale. Okay.
Well, no, I just think we'd like proper information. That's what we'd like. So I don't know that you have to pull it up, but when we're asking, is this happening at the high school level? I want to be assured it is, because I don't really have time to call 51 high schools to make sure it's happening there.
So the asterisk by Madison is because that one is through middle, and Fort Washington is in process right now. They have a rollout plan through high school. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, the underlined ones are school districts that are in the top 20 as far as largest districts. So just with those bold and underlined districts, that's a roughly 21% of all the
We
students.
don't have underlined. I don't know.
So it's 21%.
Oshkosh, Middleton, and Fond du Lac.
So, yeah, putting all those together, it's 21%. With all the additional districts, you're probably looking at easily a third. And as Laura said, we didn't look at every single one of the 400-odd districts.
Kevin, I think one of the questions, and you brought it up earlier, was that the importance of having similar assessments, similar grading from teacher to teacher. And I've been doing it a long time, and there's not ever going to be 100%. That one teacher is going to be different than the next. Somebody's going to have extra credit. I was saying, you know, if I didn't have extra credit, I'd still be in 8th grade. And so I understand that part of it, but one of the frustrations that I hear from some of the teachers who sent letters, as well as some of the board members, is that when we did our rollout, and we have a rollout that is in core classes, and some of the cores are here and some are here, that becomes probably as big of issue as any. Not so much that, you know, what's happening in Silverbrook and Badger in certain cases in our elementary, they're doing a phenomenal job, and I'm not saying they aren't in the high school as well, but one of the frustrations or biggest concerns is when you say the importance of having similar expectations per teacher, and we have a rollout that has a required class and half are one and half are the other. That, and I know you have beta groups, you have rollouts all the time, but maybe not in the core classes. And that's too late for now, but that's one of the things that I'm hearing, is that there is pretty major inconsistency between one teacher and the next based on whether they bought into this or not. Is that fair?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with the high school, we were looking to build teacher capacity. And, you know, those teachers, there's four ELA teachers and 3 world language teachers, and they volunteered to be part of this because this is something that they wanted to do. And, you know, back to the original slide of like the 3 tenants, you know, many of those departments were very far along the way of like creating rubrics and having common expectations and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, the idea, in retrospect, it might not have been a wise move. From my own experiences, when I was teaching, the rollout was the whole high school all at once with no training at all. And that went very, very poorly. And I'll be honest, when I was teaching, I was not initially a fan of this either until I understood it better. And then it became something that I, you know, to my core, I believe is what's best for kids.
Laura, you and I talked earlier today, in order to make sure that we don't have those seniors 4 years from now having 2 different philosophies. Is there anything we can do at this point in time to make sure that, not necessarily abandoning, even though I do believe that the best way is to start lower and go up as opposed to hit and miss where we're starting, for the classes that were in place this year, to make sure that Paul's English class and Don's English class, we're treating them fairly. Is there something we can do to make sure that there is no, for those kids, something, you know, Amy, as far as to give some consistency for those kids?
We're going to, I'm hearing 2 different questions there and some of what we talked about this morning. Kevin and I will sit down and meet with each of the teachers that at the high school level to really talk through their grade book in a little more detail than we have. Like we just 2 weeks ago had the pilot teachers had an opportunity to come in and meet with us and give us some feedback and talk through some of the logistics and some of the other things with regard to this. And then the consistency from class to class. Some of that assumes and just that broadly that we've had consistency all along. And while we've developed some common rubrics, just that idea, if you think of conversations you had when you were in school, and conversations continue and always will kind of be the same about, oh, take this teacher, this one is easy, this one's harder, you know, whatever. Those things exist, but yes,
There's no question there's inconsistency. There's not any question at all about the inconsistency from one teacher to the next, and that's just part of being teachers and they're individuals, okay? But what I don't want to do is to have a inconsistency that is driven by us, okay? The fact that there's inconsistencies between, Shelley and the other German teacher because they do things a little bit different, that's one thing. And I don't know if we're ever going to get, as long as we have individuals, that we're ever going to have that where it's always going to be the same. But what we don't want to have is where we're responsible for the inconsistencies.
So as we move into next year and that, how we set up the grade book and how we do that, yes, we have some, we'll have to have some further conversation, but we will be looking at how that needs to be revised. So, yes, to answer that question, yes, there are things we can do. And
For this year as well as next year.
we'll sit down and talk about that within the system, without a change within the Skyward system. Won't, my understanding, and Tim's gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong on grade one, thank you. If we do that, we have to start all over, correct? Within the grade book.
I'm not suggesting that you change the grade book. I'm suggesting that teachers have the flexibility to go in and evaluate their student performance based on what they, would I have got a B with the old system? Not teacher to teacher, but with the old system, would I have got a B and I got a C with the new one? Or maybe I got a B with the new system and I would have got a C with the old one. And I don't want to penalize somebody for being in the class, but I also don't want to go the other route. And so
So you're right, Kevin and I will sit down with the teachers to go through their grade book.
yeah,
and
not
take a look
to
at that.
change the grades, because that's not going to happen in Skyward, but we do have the ability to work with the teachers, and knowing that it's more time and effort for the teachers, and we'll provide adequate resources for the teachers to make sure that they have the time, but just so that we have that consistency.
Yep, and we're going to try to do that in the next 2 weeks. I have a potential if I have jury duty tonight, we'll call them, then I have to do that. But, that's just fair, we won't know.
I would like to see that communication trickle down to the students, because I have a student that's in a 9th grade class that's getting graded like this, and another 9th grade student that's in the same class with a different teacher that's not getting graded like this, and it's very confusing. She doesn't feel like she knows where she stands. Do you have an A or a B? I don't know, I'm at like a 3 or a 4. Well, is a 3 a B or A, or she just doesn't know where she stands. And we look in Skyward. I don't look in Skyward that much because that's their job. But she said there's nothing in there, so she doesn't know where she is. It's just really confusing to her.
Yeah, so yes, to
And
answer your question, yes.
talked to some other students, and I think that's a common theme.
I think that we're going to skip over this part and go into some of how grades are calculated within systems. And on one of the slides, this is again, the spreadsheet was linked in the original. We pulled it out and highlighted the sections of it so it's easier to see during presentation mode. But Kevin's going to talk about the different scales, and then we're going to take a look at the 5 most common scales used within the state of Wisconsin, and how that impacts the scale itself, impacts the grades students receive.
Right, so one of the changes that we're seeing with this new system is that traditionally, when you look at a grade book, grades are determined by assessment type. So if you think back to some of your child's grade book, you might see a homework grade, you might see a quiz grade, you might see a project grade, you might see a test grade. And if you think about that, what that really means is the same content and or the same skill was assessed perhaps 3 to 4 times throughout the learning progression. So for instance, when they're just learning something new, they might have had a homework assignment on that. They might have had a quiz on that. And those scores may have been lower because they were just beginning in that learning progression. So in this style of grading, instead of having assessment types in the grade book, we have those key pieces of knowledge or those key skills as kind of those bucket scores. Excuse me, I didn't mean to hit that. So the idea is that when you look at the grade book, you're able to see that my son or daughter is strong here when it comes with fractions. They are a little weaker here when it comes with ratios. I'm really challenging myself as far as the math standards go. But the idea is that we can look as parents and stakeholders and see where our child can be better. Not that it's like there's a homework grade, there's a quiz grade, there's a, that's not as helpful as parents. It would be like if you were looking at, some of your medical results, and it was like, here's your blood test score, you know what I mean? It was based on the assessment that's given. It's a little easier to have it broken out by those core competencies. Now, the other thing when we look at how grades are calculated, the traditional model is the 100-point scale, right? So if we look at the 100-point scale, it's interesting to think about it, but currently right now there's 60 ways for our students to fail. So the current grading model has 60 levels of failure because an F starts at 59.5 and it goes all the way down to 0. There's only 10 levels of a C. It's only 10 levels of a D. So there's it's kind of questionable why we would have almost 60 levels of failure that we would report out on. And when you look at what an impact a 0 does on a grade, it's pretty substantial. So these are the same grades, but they're different systems, right? So it's a 0 on the 100-point scale, 0 in the 5-point scale. 75 would usually be considered a C, translated to a 2. And if we look at the difference in the grades, the average score for the 100-point scale would be a 68.8, which would be a D. If we went to a 5-point scale, which basically just means that we are making each level equal to one another. They're equally apart from each other. That student would then get a B.
So Kevin, let me ask you what our philosophy is, and it probably varies from district to district that implements this, but I was talking with someone yesterday, a retired educator from another district that is in standards-based grading. And, oh no, 4s, rarely do you give those out. And I equated it to performance review that I was part of years ago on a 5-point scale. Jesus would be lucky to get a 5. What's our philosophy on 4s?
Our philosophy is that 4s should be attainable.
Above and beyond, but you can give them out. If you've got a consistent high performer that warrants a 4, they can get a 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we definitely don't want a system that punishes students for being proficient and meeting the standard and getting Bs. That's not what we're looking to do. So the next, when we look at how grades are calculated, we look at the algorithms that are in play. Now, if you think back to the one slide where it had all the districts, if we look at all 432 districts, each one of these algorithms is in play in some districts. So we have a mean, and once again, these are all the same scores, but it's showing you what the grade would be using that algorithm. So we rely on the mean currently in our traditional grade book, and so you can see what grade that would be. Some districts use a decaying average, which means the most recent sounding is given 65% of the weight, and the rest of the scores are given a 35% amount of the weight. You notice that there's a mean example with a 100-point scale, there's a mean example with a 5-point scale, and then we also see the decaying averages. Some school districts use what's known as power law or trend grading, and you can see how those grades are determined. So when you're thinking back to our conversation about colleges and you're thinking back to all the different districts, it's a very wide variety on how students throughout Wisconsin are assessed. What is interesting, though, when you consider this system, one of the confusing parts for parents is I think we're all very conditioned to look for scores out of the 100-point scale. And when we don't see that, that's confusing, right? And that's not normal. That's not what we're used to. That's not what our parents are used to and our grandparents are used to. But if you think about what some of the assessments in our classrooms look like, in many cases, we could have a student giving a presentation in class, and they are being assessed on that presentation with a rubric that has 4 levels of achievement. That student is given that rubric back. What happens with that score is it gets converted into a 100-point scale, which gets put into Skyward, where it lives for the grading period. Then it gets converted to a letter score, and then at the end of that semester, it gets converted back to a 4-point scale because our GPA is out of a 4-point scale. So it's kind of interesting looking at the journey of those grades. Next, when we look at our letter grades, and I'll try to speed up here to value everyone's time here, but these are currently what our definitions of letter grades are. So you can obviously read that there. One of the things that is interesting is that the GPA for an A at 90 is the same for a GPA at 100. So that is how we do things, even though there may be talk of A pluses or A minuses and things of that nature, they have the same weight. When we look at our mastery scale, this is what our pilot teachers are using to define what advanced is, what proficient is, what approaching is, and what beginning is. So one of the things I would point out is the verbiage. Like when we all think of letter grades, and if I were to say, what do you think of when you hear the word D, or the grade D, most of us would probably assume it's what? Below average, right? We would look at a C as a score of average, and a B above average, and things of that nature. So one of the things that we like about this is that if a student gets a score of a 1, we don't say that that's below average, we say that's beginning. And we expect that when you learn something new, you're beginning. And then you move up to approaching. And you think back to Monica's example, we clearly articulate where those next levels are at so that students can have that success and meet the learning goal. When we look at our pilot group, we want to define what letter grades are. So once again, we don't currently define letter grades in our system other than having that 100-point scale thing next to it. So when we look at what are we defining as what does an A mean, what does a B mean, what does a C mean, and so forth, these are what we're defining those letter grades as meaning. Not that we look at A and say excellent or a B as above average. These would be what we would expect moving forward those letter grades meet.
I'm sorry, I have a question there.
Yep.
What happens if a teacher is, Johnny would have typically gotten an 85, let's say, which we all would know is a B, but John, he's kind of in between. Like we could assess that he had an 85 because we actually had a score. So now we've got a student who you're like, yeah, sometimes they're looking like they're a 4, but sometimes they're looking like they're a 3. So how are teachers supposed to determine that? What does the kid get?
So can you repeat that, just so I'm clear?
So an 85 is clearly a B. I think we can all establish in the time of rock and scissors and paper that we've all had in school that an 85 is a B across the board, correct? Unless somebody has curved a score. Teachers, help me out. I'm correct? Thank you. Within the system, okay? So now Nancy's got an 85. Now I've got this new grading, whatever you want to call it, and sometimes I'm performing at a 4, sometimes I'm performing at a 3. I'm kind of like in the middle. How are teachers supposed to grade me? What do I get?
Well, I think even in the old system, when you look at if a student got an A in something, that A probably was averaged with some scores a B, some scores are A's, some scores
Right, I don't think you're understanding my question. An 85 is clearly a score. That clearly tells me that's a B, because we've established that. But now you're saying I could be in between an A and a B, but when I had the score, I had a 90, so that would either make me an A or a B. I'm asking you now if a teacher is unsure that Erin is at a 4 or a 3. She's demonstrating both. Sometimes she seems like she's got a 4, but then other times we're not really quite at a 4. What have teachers been told, and how have they been told to assess that grade?
Can I just add, there's a slide that talks about this end of term conversion, where I see there's mastery level 3/4. I don't know if that slide rings a bell? End of term conversion?
I think that, correct, that's
It was
not,
excised?
yes,
Okay,
correct.
because that had it where it could be a 2, or it could be a 3, or it could be a 3, or it could be a 4, but.
Correct. And the
but
reason for
please.
that is because depending on the standards in which you are showing that. So let's take music, for example. Within music, there's performing, creating, responding, and connecting. Our music teachers are going to more heavily weigh the performance standard than they are going to weigh the connecting standard.
But do our
So-
students know that, and do our teachers know that? Because clearly you're aware that we got 9 different emails at least today, and multiples reference that they've been told they should eyeball it when they're in between grades. by administration. So that's a little concerning to me because that really takes the, gee, that's a definitive B out of it when you've just told the teacher to eyeball a kid's grade. I'm super concerned about that statement.
I can tell you in your example with music, our students and parents are well aware that 60% of your grade is performance. And it doesn't matter if it's a 2, 3, 4 or an ABC. You better show up to those performances or you're not getting an A or B. But
right, but I mean, when you look at the high school
We're looking at
grading, it looks very different than that. I mean, I'm not going to pull up Skyward and share with everyone, but I'm saying
Well,
when
go
people
back,
are between grades,
2 slides.
what are we doing?
Again, you're looking at the standard or the strand. So if you're in an English class and you've spent the majority of the semester on writing and the student is inconsistent, sometimes they're going to be a 4 and sometimes they're a 3. If they're never dropping into that 2, that tells you for that writing area, and you've spent most of the semester on that in our grade conversion at semester, a student who's mostly proficient is going to get an A. If they're sometimes in that 4 advanced and they're mostly proficient, they're going to get an A.
Go back 2 slides, I believe it was,
Slides?
Kevin.
Here?
One more.
Here?
One more.
There?
This one. The bottom line here, this kid got a 0, 0, a 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 4, 4. The mean is a 2.5 and they got a B. Why a B and not a C? I think that's the question.
So that's,
As you
it's
go,
it's being averaged at that point.
So the 2.5 is the average of that grade. Pardon me?
Rounding up and not rounding down.
Correct.
so your average
And
is,
when you look at that, and you look at why they got that 2.5, that 2.5, they missed some of those assignments or those assessments in Unit 1 and 2.
Sure.
And now they've been strongly proficient. They've gotten a B.
So would that have looked a little different if it was a 0-3 to 4-2-2-0 and they wouldn't have had that strong upswing? Or that was just averaging everything equally,
That
correct?
was just averaging everything.
So that's where an educator's decision has to weigh in, that this student is still all over the map. They get some things, they don't get others. Is it aptitude? Is it focus? Is it whatever?
Correct. And it may be that some of that content is so different from unit to unit. So think of a science, a general science class where they're doing life science one quarter or 1 unit, and they're doing physical science another quarter. So drastically different, perhaps the student is really, really strong in one and not in the other, and it tells you different things.
Okay.
Now, if the unit that the student is not as well, I don't know, prepared for, doesn't understand as well, comes near the end of the semester, and they had 4s and 3s at the beginning of the semester in those units, and then trickled down lower at the end, are they then
It depends
getting
on what
punished for?
algorithm you're using, right? So when it's the teacher making the call, so these 4 algorithms, on a decaying average one, that
They would score poorly.
correct, except that unless there was one solid assessment.
So
That's where when the teacher looks at the grades, so at the end of the semester, that glance over your grades to say, yes, this accurately reflects where the child is at. That's one where our teachers have always had the ability to override a grade for whatever reason. That is one where a case where they may end up overriding the grade. That's been a consistent process that they've been able to use.
So who chooses which algorithm is used, and are you using different algorithms for each student within a class
No,
potentially? Because this is chaos.
Right, so these are the ones used within the state, right?
But who chooses in your system, who chooses which one of these
As a
algorithms is used?
district, we will set, when we set that, we will set that criteria. So that's something, we might set, we will set that for K4, because our grade books are divided up, K4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. So we will need to set that for each level.
And I would hope that you would have total buy-in of which one, from the teachers, of which algorithm you're going to use in that section.
Well, and we, so currently it's all me, right?
Mhm.
But with our pilot teachers, we have, we just had a conversation about that because they're calling a grade, and we talked about all of these algorithms with them, and went over that very thoroughly.
It seems like also from the parents' perspective, then it's confusing because then depending on which grade you're in, which school you're in,
I think, again, our, on a, communication is key. The overall system communication I can speak to, the individual communication that teachers have had with the parents through their normal means, I can't speak to that.
But that's the concerning part, because that's not, pardon me, because that's not every parent getting the same message. So that's the super concerning part, and that's the concerning part, that we have some teachers who maybe are brand new versus a teacher who's been here for 28 years and has lots of seasoned experience, and now they're trying to, teach the same thing, but I'm not arguing that maybe they're all reading Julius Caesar. I'm not going to argue that point with you, but the grade in the end is different, and the experience for the student is different. If we're trying to cut down on that, then we shouldn't have implemented this at the high school level. We should have started at the lowers and moved up. If we're going to phase out the GPA for Phi-Ed over how many years, or the Phi-Ed counting towards your GPA, we're going to phase that in, I would think that we would have spent a little more time on this whole process before we threw it at our freshmen in one lump sum for some of their core classes. I would think we would have rolled it out when they were in 5th grade and expected it to roll up, not freshman year, hey, guess what? Here you go.
Point taken.
So Laura, I just wanted, it's 10 to 8, and I don't know, we still could have another hour's worth of discussion because we're not there, but to get back to, can we make sure, and we can go forward and look at, maybe it does go back to Silverbrook, and it gradually gets up, and those who are the pilots this year at the high school will still need to, but we're going to go back to where we were at, and I don't want to mandate that, but I just know that there's too much inconsistency at this point in time. And that's one of the things we're trying to eliminate, is some of that inconsistency. And so can we eliminate some of that inconsistency for this year, and before we go forward with the 2020-21 school year, we relook at this whole scenario and maybe back it down to elementary and intermediate school, and potentially badger the middle school, because we've already, maybe they're already a 6th grader and they've been doing it for 5 years and now they're going to get into 7th. Is that doable?
We can absolutely take a really close look at that and meet with, like I said, we'll meet with those pilot teachers level by level. And we have met with the principals on a consistent basis, and I have. And so, yes.
Yeah, so somewhere, the communication to the parents, we lost a little bit of it somewhere along the line. And so we need to make sure we get back on track for that. And if there's any way that we can potentially give all the kids the benefit of the doubt this year, they're not going to get something they don't deserve, but we don't penalize somebody because they were in the wrong section. That's truly what I'm asking.
Yep.
And I hope that's just strictly high school. I mean,
Absolutely.
because that does not pertain to middle school, elementary. In fact, I was quite impressed
Absolutely.
with Monica's presentation. I'm a little jealous my kid's not in her class, but because really at the end of this, in 5th grade, she's going to be able to look every single one of her kids' parents in the eye and say, your kid is ready for 6th grade math, or your kid is not, or whatever. So I know your group's taking a lot of hard questions tonight, but I don't know that this is we should, poo-poo this thing and throw it away. I think there's really are some amazing benefits, and Monica's a great example, and if it's working in elementary and potentially Silverbrook, potentially Badger, we need to, continue to look at that, continue the pilot and see how it goes. I completely understand the high schools is different, and GPAs and class ranks mean a lot, and scholarships and colleges and all that stuff. So,
By far, what the teachers who have communicated about their greatest value in this is that how the conversation with their students about learning has shifted, and how they're, when the students with them and they're conferring with them, whether that subject is social studies, science, math, Phi-Ed, the student understands what the target is and what they're working on. And some of them have remarked about the students leading forward some of that self-reflection about right where they're at. Ms. Green commented that about how her and the students, when they come together, are they scoring the same way? And if not, why not? Because that comes from that true understanding of where you're at and that self-reflection on that.
any more questions on this? And we can certainly come back to this in the next, I don't know, month or 2 or 3, or maybe after the end of the school
I guess
year.
I'd like to hear from Laura and Don how we're going to, I'd like an update on how we take care of our high school students who are having this situation happen to them. I don't need to hear again about the middle school and the elementary, because it appears that it's working fine. But I think we have to have a solution for the high school.
Or at least a report on how this pilot is going at the high school, because we don't know if we have a problem at the high school. We don't know that we have a kid who
I think we have
got...
an inconsistency problem. That's what we have. I'm not suggesting that every child in the classroom is having a problem. I'm saying it's an inconsistency problem. It's not fair and it's not equal. And it's inconsistent across, how many freshmen do we have, Ralph, in West? Okay, so you got 300 freshmen. All 300 are not having the same system. That's a problem.
As far as what their letter grade is
Right.
versus, because I'll tell you, there's been inconsistencies in teaching as long as teaching's
That's
been
not what-
around.
and
I
that's-
mean,
And again, that's not what I'm talking about. I understand that, one teacher teaches certainly different than another, just as we all communicate differently.
Right.
We're all individuals. I'm talking about the fact that it's a complete different system.
boy, you didn't want to get Mrs. Lucky when you were in my high school, and her name was deceiving because she was as tough as can be. And I mean, but I understand what you're saying. And so just a report back on the high school specifically, and we'll go from there. So, great. Thank you very much for all who participated in this, and appreciate all your information and answering our questions. I know they were tough questions tonight, but I'm glad we did this. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Superintendent Kierkegaard.
Just a couple quick comments. One is 4K registration is up and running. And so I believe as of today, we already have 16 open enrollment applications for 4K, kids coming in. And so we truly have a phenomenal 4K program. We've heard Emily talk before, and so that's great to hear. Have been fortunate to be part of the library planning process. We met on Wednesday, and they talked about colors, and I narrowed it down to 3 different kinds of khaki, and so that's, so I'm not sure which one of those khaki is going to win out, but I'm guessing it'll be one of those 3. Yeah. So anyway, that's it.
Any other items for follow-up tonight? Our next meeting for the board is on February 24th, and that'll be a committee of a whole right here at 5:30. We are going to adjourn into executive session here in a minute to talk about personnel. I would ask board members, now that we are going to soon be starting some sort of a process on selecting a new superintendent, take a look at your calendars. I can tell you from 2 years ago when we went through this process, it ended up being a lot of extra meetings that weren't scheduled. So if you have an idea of when your vacations are or spring break trips, I'm not saying we meet during spring break, but just take a look at your calendar and kind of start thinking about that. And we typically use doodle polls, and Jen can certainly help us set that up going forward. So if there are no more comments, questions, I will move to adjourn into executive session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.851C to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and take any such action if necessary based on its discussion, namely administrative personnel.
Second.
And all in favor, we'll do a roll call vote with Kurt.
Yes.
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 Great.